We challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives of George Samueli. And we are now only, today's the 9th, and we're only 3 days away from the election here in Hungary. And of course, everything is very, very tense. And, you know, as we discussed last time, the polls, the great majority of them predict a victory for the opposition, Peter Magyar and the Tisa party. But as I pointed out last time, you have to take these polls with a considerable grain of salt, because those polls that are published by the pollsters who are close to the opposition and tend to be funded by the Sorosites and the whole general EU network of think tanks and NGOs. Those polls tend to show that TISO will win and win comfortably. The polls that are published by organizations close to the government predict a Fidesz win. So, since the opposition tend to publish more polls than the government does, then the polls are weighted in favor of the opposition. Now, one has to keep in mind, and why this election is obviously are important, is the personality and identity, political identity of Viktor Orban. Orban, over the past more than decade and a half, has been the leader of the basic populist nationalist opposition to the two key projects of the European Union. The first project, it was stated explicitly by George Soros, and since then, I think they've tried to put a little bit on the back burner and try to muffle it, but nonetheless, it was obviously an agenda of Soros's, an agenda of much of the EU elite. The first project was the replacement of the indigenous population of Europe, their replacement by migrants from Asia and Africa. This obviously went into high gear in 2015, but this is an ongoing thing on the part of the European elites, apart from on the part of the NGOs, and this whole network of institutions funded by the EU that promote and advocate on behalf of migration, essentially, and therefore using migration to replace the population of Europe. And this project, I think Orban clearly led the opposition against. He made clear, first of all, that he built fences around Hungary. That was in 2015. He built the fences around it. And more important, after that, he said, well, Hungary wasn't going to take any migrants at all. So when Europe starts making all these plans about quotas of migrants, who gets how many quotas, Orban said, well, we're not taking anybody. Then the Europeans said, well, okay, even if you don't take anybody, you should at least put up some money for rehousing and resettling migrants. He said, we're not putting up any money at all. So this was clearly, essentially Orban throwing down the gauntlet to the EU And he really became a marked man after that. And the EU then started mounting its campaign against him and fining Hungary, preventing Hungary from receiving any funds from the EU. And then these various rulings by the EU Court of Justice against Hungary, um, and involving successive fines that Hungary would have to pay. So now, so that was clearly the one project that of the EU's that Orban opposed. But of course, that was overtaken by another major project, which was essentially mobilizing the European continent for a war against Russia. And that is I mean, this has been ongoing. It certainly didn't start in 2022. It started much earlier. Started really back in the really, probably around the time of Maidan 2014, but even earlier than that. And this is obviously where Europe wants to go. Europe wants to wage this war against Russia, and and this is, as I say, this is an ongoing project for the coming years. We've discussed it many times before, how the Europeans present the crisis with Russia in terms of, well, we will be at war with Russia by 2029 or 2030. So this is a serious project. And Orban has opposed this, over and over again. He said that this is a disaster. This will end very badly for Europe. And above all, it will end very badly for Hungary, which is right in the middle of Europe and has no business of getting involved yet again in a war between East and West, where it just simply gets clobbered on either side. So therefore, this is yet another project, and of Europe's. So, given that, it isn't surprising that this election has aroused so much intense commentary by non-Hungarians, and that's what's important. That if you peruse the media, and this has now become a kind of an obsessive issue, then you see endless article after article denouncing Orban, and at this stage, the jubilations, celebrations, and congratulations that finally the globalists, the EU bureaucracy have got Orban out. And it's very reminiscent, really. I mean, I've said this many times before, but it's very reminiscent of what took place during the 1990s with the obsessive interest in Slobodan Milosevic. Now, Serbia, like Hungary, was a very small country, and yet it became an absolute, front page news day after day throughout, the Western world about the goings on in Serbia and the need to topple Milosevic. And then finally, he'd survived one Western intervention after another, and then finally they managed to get Milosevic out in October 2000. Now, that you say, what was the project then? There was a very big project that was at play in October 2000, and that was NATO expansion, because Milosevic stood in the way of NATO expansion, and Milosevic presented himself as a kind of a third way option. He's somebody who neither with the East nor with the West is presenting a different kind of a model from the kind of the neoliberal order that was being imposed on the former communist bloc. And Milosevic said, okay, well, this is Yugoslavia. We had our own our own version of socialism, this kind of market socialism or whatever you called it, worker management, and kind of decentralization or whatever. It was at least a different model from the sort of free market capitalism that was now being imposed on the former communist world. But even more important, he said, we're not joining any military alliance. We're going to maintain our neutrality. This was always unacceptable. This was the West was never going to accept any kind of neutrality, non-alignment, non-membership of NATO. That was never acceptable, and therefore Milosevic was targeted. Throughout the 90s, he was targeted by the West and became a figure of absolute hatred within the Western media. And during his trial, he would ask, again and again, well, why are you so preoccupied with my little country? What's so important that daily the Western media report about all the goings on in Serbia? And of course, why they were preoccupied was because if Milosevic were to prevail, if an alternative model or one of neutrality, non-alignment with any military blocs, maintaining good relations with Russia, but also good relations with the West, if that model were to prevail, then the whole kind of militarization of the continent, the subsuming of the entire continent within the sort of NATO EU structures, that was going to fail, and therefore Milosevic had to be removed from power. And once he was removed from power, then that was done. I mean, what was it? Serbia ceased to matter. No one wrote about Serbia anymore. There was still occasional flurries of hatred directed at Serbia, but basically that objection was now removed. So something similar is happening now in the case of Hungary. If they can get Orban out, then the opposition to the migration policy, I think, will gradually evaporate, because Orban is being the leader of the opposition to opening up Europe to mass migration. Of course, there are other populist leaders in Europe, but none of them is in power. And not only is none of them in power, none of them is likely to be in power anytime soon. AFD is not coming to power. I mean, if one looks at the election performances of these populists, they've all reached their ceiling. The AFD, okay, they can do a little bit better, a little bit worse, but fundamentally they've reached their ceiling. And for the AFD in Germany to come to power, they would need to be able to form a government pretty much by themselves, because none of the establishment parties is going to get into a coalition with the AFD. And as long as that's the case, then the AFD can be kept out of power. And that goes in the Netherlands with Geert Wilders. I mean, that's true of Salvini in Italy. He reached his peak and is now a much diminished figure in Italy. Nigel Farage in the UK is just a joke. I mean, he's not going anywhere. So Orban was the key figure because he was actually the leader of Hungary. He was actually a prime minister. He was the real deal. He made decisions. So it's not just it wasn't just somebody who was, oh well, he did a little better in this election than he did in the last election. He's got his vote has gone up a little bit. Yeah, okay, his vote, but you're not in power, and you have no prospect of being in power. So that's why it's so important to get him out, and that's why, as I've said here before, it isn't going to end with his losing an election. He's not going to be just if he does lose. And as I say, I'm not necessarily predicting that he will lose. The polls are a little dubious. But if he does lose, the EU isn't just going to allow him to become the leader of the opposition and prepare to return to power in 4 years' time, in the way Trump did. That's not that. That isn't going to happen. I mean, the EU will absolutely insist that he be prosecuted. Will his allies be prosecuted? And the new government launch huge, wide-ranging corruption probes into everybody who is aligned with Orban. Because the Europeans do not want to see Orban return. That this has to be the, the kind of a final lesson to everybody in Europe. No more of this populist nationalist. Now, so as I say, just want to emphasize again the two projects. These are two major projects of the EU. One, the mass migration, to use mass migration to replace the local population, and therefore you have a compliant people that just get to do as they're told, and therefore there won't be any more resistance to the diktats of Schmerz and von der Leyen. So you got a population that can be easily manipulated. Not to mention, once you have a substantial migrant population, then you can play off one migrant population against the other, and just a divided countries. Divided societies are very easy to rule. You just play all different groups and different sects and different religious affiliations against one another, and everybody hates everybody else, and therefore governments get to do whatever they want. So that's a clear plan. Orban has resisted this, effectively, quite effectively. I mean, given the limitations. I mean, Hungary is a fairly small country, and it's therefore, it carries a limited weight in Europe. And then, of course, the next project, as I say, which is the waging this war against Russia. That's a very big project. Key European countries and the UK, in alliance with the EU, are on board for this project. This is a decades-long endeavor. It's not something that's going to come to an end anytime soon. So that's mobilizing the continent for a long-term twilight struggle. May even get to exchange of missiles and exchange of fire between Europe and Russia. But I think that everybody is on board with that. The European leadership is on board with that. And quite likely, sometime in the near future, with all the massive increases in military spending, that they're going to start introducing conscription and so on. So and Orban has repeatedly warned about this. He said war is being planned in Brussels. He would return from Brussels, say war is being planned in Brussels. That's the program. And nobody's listened to him. Nobody took him very seriously. But that is what's going on. Um, and he has resisted this, and he's paid the price for it. I mean, he's some 20 billion euros that Europe has denied Hungary. Basically, said, well, getting it. And then of course there's all the European Court of Justice, which has been imposing daily fines on Hungary. So Hungary has paid a considerable price for its obduracy. And if you look at why is the liberal media so gleeful? Why are they daily reporting with barely bated breath, with excitement about this election? They think we've got him. We've absolutely got him. We once we can remove him, there is almost nothing. There's no resistance at all in Europe. Not from Maloney, not from the AFD, not from Nigel Farage. There would be no resistance to our project. But anyway, so let's the media coverage has been quite interesting. So here's a story. It's in today's Politico, um, and it shows the extent to which the EU intends to hold Magyar's feet to the fire. They're basically going to make sure that he plays ball with them. Then again, um, I think Hungarians are kind of deluding themselves in thinking that once we get rid of the irksome Orban, then all of the nastiness from Brussels will disappear, and we're going to have good relations, and everything's going to be now. We want to kiss and make up, and basically they're going to forgive us and like us because we got rid of Orban. That ain't going to happen. Absolutely ain't going to happen. First of all, the Hungarians are going to be punished for having voted for Orban for 16 years. But now that they've got rid of him, they're going to make sure that the Hungarians get with the program and realize what they need to do in order to get some of this money back. Anyway, here is the story in Politico, and the way the story is framed is quite interesting, because it says here that Orban's rival faces uphill battle to unfreeze the 17 billion euros in EU funds. So and I think that's correct. They're not just going to unfreeze it and say, "Oh, great, we've got there's a change of government, and now we've got our man in office, and here's your 17 billion." No, they're going to extract the price. And so here's the story. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that was got stuck there. All right, let's go back. All right, now. Okay, on the campaign trail, Magyar pledged to quickly free up the EU payouts, which were blocked over Hungary's democratic backsliding. That will allow him to reset Budapest relations with the bloc after years of bad blood between Orban and Brussels. So that's correct. That's what Magyar has been doing. He's saying, "Hey, well, once I'm in, and the objectionable Orban is no longer there, they gotta release the money." And so here the Politico quotes Marton Hajdu, TISA's EU affairs chief, and says, "TISA will bring home the EU funds. To unlock them, we will have a completed RRP, which is a plan that governments payments under the EU's post-COVID recovery fund. We'll have it planned by the end of August. We will discuss with EU partners how best to deliver it, also in light of the election results and what we find after Fidesz once in government." So, they're very, very optimistic. Yeah, of course they'll release it. However, Politico rightly, is skeptical and says even if Magyar secures a big parliamentary majority, he will have little time to carry out the reforms necessary to secure the 10 billion euros allocated to Hungary under the EU's post COVID recovery funding before an August the 31st deadline. And the European Commission is insisting it won't release any money until Hungary delivers on these reforms, regardless of the election outcome. And I think that's absolutely right. The European Commission will not release any money until Hungary delivers on what it calls these reforms. I mean, these are all Mickey Mouse reforms. I mean, as I said, the reforms were, hey, you've got to open your economy up to the transnational corporations. No more of this Hungarianization of the economy, allowing bids to go to local entrepreneurs, local businesses. No, no, no. It's got to be, you got to have the big transnational corporations have to take over key parts of the economy. So you got to do that, and then you got to appoint the kind of judges that we like, the judges who are going to rule in our favor. So you're going to, what they call judicial reform. Then it says, during his campaign, Magyar vowed to claw back 17 billion euros from the EU, equivalent to roughly 10% of the country's annual GDP. Well, that's very interesting because when you read so many of the stories about Hungary's economy, and they say, "Oh, Hungary's economy is doing so terribly; it's awful, awful, awful." But very rarely is there any mention of the impact of the EU's withholding these funds. I mean, 17 billion euros in a country with a small economy such as Hungary's. Well, that has a significant economic impact, and that has had a significant economic impact on Hungary, and it has weakened Orban because basically, they're short on funds. And that was the whole point. That was why the money was withheld. Not because of he's not adhering to democratic norms. He's not appointing the kind of judges that we want to see appointed. No. No, they were doing it in order to weaken Orban politically. And 10% of GDP, that's a lot of money. And then here we have his Tisa party, this is Peter Magyar, is the favorite to win, or blah, blah, holding a 10-point lead. And then, in order to secure the funds, it has promised to introduce anti-corruption measures, restore academic independence, and join the European Public Prosecutor's Office, the bloc's anti-crime agency. So when you read that, anti-corruption measures, read prosecuting Orban and his allies, restore academic independence, so all kinds of the hacks that we're going to put in, and join the European Public Prosecutor's Office. So in other words, the Europeans will get to make sure that the right people are prosecuted in Hungary. And then, under the current rules, the Hungarian government has to fulfill 27 EU mandated conditions, officially known as super milestones, that will reform the country's procurement rules. That's the procurement rule. That's the key thing. We've got to make sure that we take over the important parts of the Hungarian economy, and increase judicial independence and academic freedom as a precondition to claim any funding. And then Magyar's push will be eased by the fact that Orban's government has already partly addressed the EU's conditions over years of inconclusive talks with Brussels. So they've partly addressed them. They've tried to negotiate with Brussels, trying to give Brussels as much as possible, and they still can't get the money. The money is not being released because it was crucial for Hungary not to release this money because they wanted Orban weakened. According to a 2025 report by Hungarian civil society groups, 17 of the conditions have been fully met, 9 have been partly met, and 1 remains outstanding. A judicial reform by Orban in 2023 also led the Commission to unlock 10 billion euros that had previously been frozen. So originally, it was around 30 billion euros that had been frozen. But this is actually untrue about the release of the money. The funds that were released in 2023 was arose. The release happened because Orban went along with a sanctions package. He said he was going to reject the European sanctions package. Then he took a bathroom break, and the sanctions package went through, and Orban received the 10 billion euros. So, but it wasn't because of the judicial reform. But anyway, however, fulfilling these super milestones is the only first step towards unlocking 10 billion euros post-COVID money before the August deadline. Anyway, the Hungarian government will then have to carry out more granular reforms linked to climate and digital transition to fully recover the funds. So not only do they have to transform their economy and society to meet Brussels, but they have to link it to climate and digital transition to fully recover the funds. And then, in a stark warning earlier this year, a senior legal advisor to the Court of Justice of the EU recommended annulling the December 2023 decision to free up 10 billion euros in EU funds for Hungary. He argued that the money was disbursed before the reforms were undertaken by Orban's government. And then this is an interesting. I mean, obviously, you've undoubtedly seen all of the stories about Hungary, the gleeful stories, that we finally got him. As I say, it all kind of reminds me of 99 2000. Basically, the polls are also showing that Milosevic was likely to lose. So the celebration already, the champagne corks are popping. And this is an article in the New York Times. I chose it at random. Maybe you could pick any one of these gleeful articles. But what I think was interesting about this is the way they mouth the all of the familiar cliches that you would get. So here's the headline: Orban's fate is a warning not to get too close to Trump. Now, this is of course very interesting because we've been told that the problem with Orban is immigration, Putin, Russia, and his refusal to help Ukraine. But here, it's apparently Trump. Well, that's good. Well, that's new. Apparently, that's going to lose the election for him. Now, Hungary is one of the few countries in Europe where Trump is held not in very high esteem, but nonetheless not in such as low esteem as he's held elsewhere. But nonetheless, New York Times has said, "Oh well, let's." We throw Putin into the mix, but let's put Trump into the mix as well. And here we have this is Orban's fate, warning not to get too close to Trump, and then it says his embrace, that's Trump's embrace, may be a kiss of death for the Hungarian leader, though MAGA supporters see Hungary as a conservative utopia. Many Hungarians aren't so happy for their country to play this role. Worse are the effects of Mr. Trump's policies, aggravating an economic downturn and threatening the Prime Minister's electoral support. In recent years, Far right parties around Europe have cultivated close ties with Mr. Trump. Hungary's election may be a warning against getting too close, for if Mr. Orban falls, it will be no small part thanks to his fan in the White House. Now, this, of course, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The problems that Hungary has been having has been the energy problem, which is the first, Hungary was no longer able to receive gas from Russia because Ukraine closed down the pipeline going from Russia to Hungary. So he closed that down at the end of 2024. And now, recently, he's closed down the oil pipeline. So Hungary can't get oil from Russia either. Now, as we discussed earlier this week, there was this surprising attempt to blow up the Turk Stream gas pipeline, which is the gas from Russia via Turkey through the Balkans and through Serbia and into Hungary. So but that the Turk Stream has repeatedly been attacked by Ukraine. Now, there's a serious energy problem. The Europeans have notable economic issues that have arisen because they impose sanctions against Russia. That's, everyone in Europe is suffering as a result of the sanctions because, of course, the European economies were powered by cheap energy from Russia. Now they're not getting it anymore. Then they decided to think, well, we can absolutely, happily cut ourselves off from energy from Russia, and we're going to rely on energy from the Middle East. And then, lo and behold, well, we weren't expecting that. They find that, the Middle East is not a reliable source of energy. Who'd have thunk? Who'd have thunk that the Middle East is riven by instability and wars? So none of that makes it into the article. Somehow it's all Trump. Now, in fact, Trump did impose sanctions on countries purchasing Russian oil, and that could have hurt Hungary seriously. But in fact, because Trump likes Orban, he basically waived sanctions against Hungary for its purchases of oil. But the fundamental problem is, and I think as Orban himself said the other day during the news conference with J.D. Vance, he said, well, it doesn't really make a great deal of sense for countries that have no energy resources, that have no natural resources, to impose sanctions on a country that does have energy resources and that does have natural resources. I mean, sooner or later, this is going to end very badly, and it has ended badly for Europe. But instead of that, they kind of want to make it as if somehow it's Trump that has weakened Hungary. Well, what weakened Hungary was the policy of sanction that has weakened everybody in Europe. But anyway, this article then goes on. Here. That Then yes, he says here that after a first term at the turn of the millennium, Mr. Orban has now ruled without interruption for 16 years, wielding electoral majorities. His Fidesz party has remolded the country in its image. It rewrote the constitution, forced the prestigious Central European University to leave, and banned LGBT-related material in schools as part of a sweeping move against civil society. The all-dominant Mr. Orban claims, serves to defend Hungary's national identity and even its independence from overbearing EU authorities. Now, the interesting thing, first of all, he says it rewrote the Constitution? Well, first off, um, constitutions are often changed. I mean, the United States has amended the Constitution quite a number of times. I mean, known as the Bill of Rights, the constitutions get amended. The other thing is, of course, that the Constitution that Orban amended. So I noticed somebody says, "Oh no, anything but the LGBT education." Yes, anything but that. Um, but that the constitution that was amended was the communist constitution. It was the constitution that was basically unchanged after 1989. Though, and there had been some amendments after 1989, but the constitution is the constitution that was written in 1949. It's the communist constitution. So these are amendments. So there were amendments after 1989, and there were amendments under Orban. But the constitution is the 1945 communist constitution. So it's basically Orban is amended the communist constitution along, but it had already been amended after 1989. So the way this article is framed just suggests, oh, the Constitution, the sacrosanct Constitution, no doubt, promulgated by King Stephen himself, and Orban had amended it. Now, let's look at let's look at the rest of this list of horrors perpetrated by Orban. Here is force the prestigious Central European University to leave. All right. Now, two things about that. First of all, the Central European University has not left. You go on Nadorutsa, not far from here. You go to Nadorutsa, and there you'll see it. There's the Central European University. It hasn't left. The other thing is that it's not prestigious. It's one of those things that journalists always like to write. They always embellish everything. They love gilding the lily. So they always have to put in something like, this is prestigious university. That's prestigious. What prestigious? What there's nothing prestigious about it. It doesn't have any prestigious academic credibility. It's just absolute mediocrities. And the only reason why the Central European University acquired this particular standing, and this kind of goes back a few years, because remember, this was before the Ukraine and the sanctions and all the rest. This was a real bone of contention with the West in the West about the Central European University. Orban is threatening the Central European University. The Central European University, which was funded by Soros, what it did was offer degrees which then were counted as a degree from an accredited American university. So anyone who registered for a degree at the Central European University got an accredited Hungarian degree and an American degree. Well, obviously, the Hungarian government was bound to get a little fed up with it and say, well, why should you have this advantage over a Hungarian university, so that people come to you and say, well, I want a degree at an accredited American university. So that's that. I mean, apart from the obvious fact that the Central European University was indeed geared towards churning out cadres, politically motivated cadres that would serve a kind of Soros agenda in Hungary. That was why it was founded. But apart from that, it was obviously unfair to the Hungarian universities, because the Central European University had this advantage. So the Hungarian government said to the Central European University, you remember that guy, Michael Ignatieff, one of those really insufferable twerps, who's been around forever. I mean, these Canadians are among the worst, like Chrystia Freeland, Michael Ignatieff, they're among the worst. Anyway, he was the president of the Central European University. And what the Hungarian government said to the Central European University said, well, if you are offering degrees at an accredited American university, then prove to us that you are indeed an accredited American university. Prove to us that you have an American campus. Well, they didn't have an American campus, so they couldn't prove it. They said, well, okay, you don't have an American campus, you are not an accredited American university. So they went through this whole rigmarole of setting up an office. I think it was at Bard University. They set up an office and said, "Oh no, we have a campus. We have an American campus. Look, here at Bard, that's our campus." So the Hungarian government went there and said, "Well, this isn't a campus. This is just an office. This is like a post office box." And that was it. That was the whole point. They said, fine. Then they said to the Central European University, you can continue to stay here in Budapest, but you're not an accredited American university. You can then essentially offer degrees as an accredited Hungarian university, like everybody else. And once that happened, once all they could do was offer degrees from an accredited Hungarian university, they were no longer able to offer the American university degree. Well, suddenly, no one really wanted to go to the Central European University, and so it's there, but no one's really very interested in it anymore. But that was that was the whole point. But it's always just hilarious that they have to put this in. This is very prestigious. You're prestigious. You get, I know. Think of some prestigious universities, Stanford, Harvard, or Central European University is prestigious. They're like, what's prestigious? Where name a prestigious professor. Name some prestigious academic courses that they run. It didn't exist. It was just simply they had an advantage over Hungarian universities because they offered degrees at an accredited American university. And then we just go back to the this prestigious Washington Post article, and it says, and banned LGBT related material in schools as part of a sweeping move against civil society. Now, notice what they're saying. They're not really banning anything that the LGBT or banning LGBT activities or anything. They're banning LGBT related material in state schools. Well, why should there be LGBT related material available in state schools, particularly as parents? Hungary is quite a conservative country, and Hungarians don't particularly want their children to be subjected to LGBT related material in schools. That's all the schools. So, when it comes to LGBT stuff, Hungary, actually among the more, well, no, I know they're not, they're less liberal. They're less liberal than Western Europe and the Western European countries in that they don't recognize gay marriage, but they do recognize gay civil unions. But on this issue, which is, and this caused huge outrage. I mean, again, this went on and on. You recall this about this LGBT ban from, this material from state schools, and Hungary was punished for it. Hungary was fined and reviled, among the among the EU worthies. Remember when they filed a lawsuit against Hungary because of this? But all it was is LGBT related material in state schools. Something that, incidentally, was the norm just a few years ago in most European countries. So even when after all, when these things were when LGBT was legalized and so on, there were still bans in place for what was deemed like LGBT. It wasn't even called that in those days. LGBT propaganda in state schools. In other words, this was subsidized by government and therefore subsidized by taxpayers, and therefore this is taxpayers are funding for something that they found morally reprehensible. So, but that's the gravamen of these charges against Orban. Now, as you probably, we've talked about this a number of times. We've had a massive intervention within the Hungarian election by the Western intelligence agencies, and the way they've done this is by publishing transcripts of the telephone conversations um, of where's Szijjártó, the Hungarian foreign minister, and then Orban himself and his conversation. So this is quite an extraordinary development because I mean we're obviously we're familiar with intelligence services in intruding into elections. I mean, we've seen that now in several U.S. elections, 2016, 2020, 2024. The intelligence services intervene in the elections. But this is quite extraordinary to have this in Europe, and these publication of these confidential. I mean, foreign ministers talk to one another, and these conversations are expected to be private. I mean, this is what diplomacy relies on: secrecy. You can't just simply have um, people people over listening in to a conversation, which some of it can be involve national security. Some of it could be quite embarrassing, but the sort of haggling that goes on in diplomacy. And so here we have the publication, one after another, of the conversations between Szijjártó and Lavrov. And then the other day, we had the publication of a transcript of a conversation between Orban and Putin. So, I mean, we talked about the Lavrov-Szijjártó conversations, and what was involved there was Szijjártó, essentially in private, kind of pretty much as he was in public, obviously seeking good relations with Russia, when Lavrov made a pitch that the sister of a so-called Russian oligarch should be taken off the sanctions list. And Szijjártó says, "Yeah, I'll do what I can. I'll make a pitch for it at the next EU meeting." This, of course, caused huge outrage. But the most obvious question asked is, well, was it reasonable for the sister of a Russian businessman to be under sanctions? I mean, leave aside the question of whether the Russian businessman himself should be under sanction. I mean, the whole sanctions policy is really an outrage, and something that Hungary has repeatedly objected to. So the sanctions, what exactly is the purpose of the sanctions? They cause pain, but without actually accomplishing anything very much. But the EU now is on this sanctions rampage, sanctioning one person after another, and all because they're fighting for Ukraine somehow. But anyway, but here we have the sister of the person who they were sanctioning because he's an oligarch. Anyway, so that was one of the conversations, um, and now we have this disclosure of the transcript of the Putin Orban telephone call. Now, if you recall, on last October, when we had a lengthy phone call between Trump and Putin, and then Trump um, released the truth describing the phone call, and he said, "Well, this was a good call with Putin, and we're probably going to meet in Budapest soon." And then shortly after, Trump released his truth, and Putin and the Kremlin also released their own readout from the phone call. The Kremlin was a little more cagey whether there was going to be a meeting in Budapest, but nonetheless, Trump went with that, and that was on a Thursday. Obviously, Orban was beside himself with excitement. After all, he had been the chief peacemaker in Europe during the time where Trump was out of power. When he was Hungary was held the presidency of the EU Council. He went on this diplomatic missions. He went to see Zelensky. He went to see Putin. He went to see Xi Jinping. He went to see Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And he was really enjoying this role of this global mediator. But here now it seemed like his diplomacy had paid off. Hungary was going to be the scene of a historic summit, which would bring this the war in Ukraine to an end. Anyway, that was the idea. And the day after Trump made the announcement, Orban telephoned Putin, obviously quite excited, and welcoming Russia to Hungary, naturally assuring Putin that you don't have anything to fear. We're not going to execute the ICC warrant against you, and that this will be a historic opportunity to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. As we know, that summit never happened. Trump walked back his pledge to hold this meeting in Budapest. On Friday, he had Zelensky at I can't remember, was it at the White House or at Mar-a-Lago? I think it was at the White House. Zelensky came, and then Trump seemed to just change his mind and said, "You know what? No summit." And that kind of badly let down Orban. I think that did weaken Orban's position. But anyway, on that day, earlier in the day, on that Friday, Orban called Putin, and so here is the transcript of that phone conversation, which again, the Western intelligence services obviously they spy on these calls, but generally they don't release them to the media. But all this is now being released or being dumped just days before the election, and so Bloomberg publishes this, and let's take a look at this this call. And here we have Orban. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to call. I would like to wish you good health and all the best on the occasion of your birthday. I'm calling because yesterday I spoke with the American president. He said that the Americans would like to organize a Russian-American meeting in Budapest. And that is very pleasing to me. I would like to find out whether this can really be made to happen. And then Putin says, "Good afternoon, Victor. I'm very glad to hear that. Indeed, we talked yesterday with the American president, and he raised the idea of such a meeting. I consider it a timely and useful initiative. We agreed that first our staff will meet. The president named a few people from his team. In the first stage, it will probably be a meeting between our foreign ministers, between Rubio and Lavrov. They will define the nature of the joint work and the framework for broader cooperation. President Trump mentioned a few people who need to be contacted: Vice President Vance, Rubio, Witkoff, and others. After that, we will have to designate the appropriate level of representation." And then, according to Donald, Budapest is a suitable venue for such meetings because Viktor Orban is a friend of both of us. I agree with the American president's assessment and with the proposal for a Budapest meeting. If you, honored minister, have any objections, we can still use our hospitality intentions. Rubio has not yet contacted Lavrov, but I know they will coordinate today. As soon as they set a date, your foreign minister can be involved as well to discuss with his colleagues and work out the details. Of course, I, dear Victor, am always at your disposal. Thank you. All right, so that was Putin's response to uh, Orban. And then, so Orban then says, "Vladimir, first of all, it's a great honor for us. Of course, we are friends. Our friendship began in 2009 when you received me at the St. Petersburg Library. But yesterday, our friendship rose to such a high level that I can help in any way. There's a story in our Hungarian picture books where a mouse helps a lion. I am ready to help immediately. It is a good thing we can meet again because after COVID, we have not had regular meetings. Before the pandemic, we met almost every year. I am very pleased that we can have a personal meeting again. In any matter where I can be of assistance, I am at your service." Um, and then Putin said, "Well, thank you very much. I value our relations highly." And then Orban says, "We have been glad about that for a long time. The more friends we make, the more possibilities we have to resist our adversaries." And then Putin says, "I agree, and I would like to stress that I greatly appreciate your country's and personally your independent and flexible stance on the Ukrainian crisis. It is incomprehensible to us that such a balanced middle ground position only generates counter arguments. In this respect, Hungary is one of the few, perhaps the only European country that is an acceptable venue for the meeting we are discussing. I also look forward to possible personal meetings in the near future." And then, if the foreign minister, who is often here, recently took part in an international event, he will also have the opportunity to meet his colleagues. Should anything arise, I am, of course, ready to receive him. I think the ministerial consultations will be useful, and we can decide together on the next steps. I believe that Donald and I are grateful for their preparedness. Donald has a surprising ability to deal with various crises, such as the Middle East and more recently the Gaza segment regulation. And I hope that a satisfactory solution can also be found for the Ukraine-Russia conflict. All right, so just to pause there, this happened really just a few days after the the announcement of the Trump 20-point plan to settle the Gaza conflict, and then of course there was Trump's visit to Sharm el Sheikh, and then Trump's visit to Israel. And Trump was at that moment riding high. He was the peacemaker. You know, he'd established the board of peace. All the leaders of the Middle East were beside themselves with in joy that here was that Trump had worked a miracle. He'd brought this war in Gaza to an end, and a number of the leaders, Egypt and the rest, believed that he had brought Israel to heel. He had told Israel, knock it off. Peace is more important. So having done that, Trump was ready and said, well, now I'm going to deal with this Ukraine issue. Now, remember, in August, before that, there was the meeting in Alaska, the Anchorage meeting, where, again, it seemed like some progress had been made, some understanding. Certainly, the Russians thought that some progress had been made. They talked about the spirit of Anchorage. but after Alaska, if you recall, all of the European NATO member states, they rushed over to the White House along with Zelensky and told Trump, no, 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 we can't do that, we can't possibly, no, 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 and Trump seemed to have been dissuaded and went back to that mindless NATO talking point of an immediate ceasefire, even though the Russians have said they're not going to accept an immediate ceasefire. And then something like this happened after this meeting with Zelensky in October. The Trump just said, "Well, the summit isn't going to happen," and then again started demanding a ceasefire, and knowing that that's a non-starter. Um, but as we read on, and the thrust of the much of the media coverage of this phone conversation is that, wow, this is horrific, this is shocking, because look at how friendly Orban's interactions with Putin are. But there's nothing surprising about this. We've known this. We've known that Orban and Putin have had a cordial relationship, as have Seattle and Lavrov. So there's nothing surprising about all this, and we know. We recall from last October that Orban was actually very excited about this being the host of this summit, and was probably thinking that if he can pull this off, he's a shoo-in for the April election. But it didn't happen that way, and that did weaken Orban, having vested so much in in negotiating some kind of a deal between Russia and the United States over Ukraine, having put so much effort into it, and then essentially being left empty-handed. It just made him look somewhat ineffectual. But in any case, there's nothing here in these private conversations that are in any way damaging. So why are people suggesting that there's something damaging about this? Well, for obvious reasons, which we started off with. This is a project. This is a major kind of liberal European transatlantic EU, NATO, whatever political, military, media establishment project to wage a long twilight struggle against Russia. That's the key. Orban was trying to prevent that, and that's why they find this appalling, that the leader of a government of an EU NATO member state should have cordial relations with Russia. No, you're supposed to shake your fist at Russia. Remember how many times as Emmanuel Macron said, one of these days I'm going to phone Putin, but he hasn't done it. He just keeps saying, well, one of these days I'm really going to do it. I'm really going to phone. He doesn't do it. But here, Orban, tried to do something, and it didn't work. Hungary just doesn't have the clout to do it. But nonetheless, it showed that there isn't a unified EU-NATO front on behalf of war with Russia. Anyway, let's just go back to the that conversation. And here we have. So this is. And then Orban says, honestly, I'm also very surprised. I have known Donald for a long time. He's not a typical person. Both laugh. His approach leaves no open problems. I watch with admiration how successful he is. His business style, almost like a tornado, yields results. And then Putin says, as they say, he moves forward like a tank. It works for him, and you can only feel joy about it. Before the Anchorage meeting, the American side formulated the general principles of possible regulation. And I think those will come up again in the discussions. We already have talked about it in Anchorage, and there will probably be something to discuss in Budapest as well. And then Orban says, "May I ask, Mr. President, how you are doing?" Putin says, "Everything is great. Thank you. I exercise. I also ski. I know you play football." Orban says, "I try." They both laugh. All is well. And then Orban says, "I'm glad the foreign minister will receive further information. I'm also at your disposal whenever you need me. Thank you, Victor. We will keep in touch." And then Orban, "Thank you. Thank you for the conversations. I wish you all the best." Um, this, this truly a scandalous. Um, and so, again, today is still Thursday, so I imagine there's still a couple of days left for more um, transcripts of conversations to be published. But why I think none of this really means anything is that everything that you read here in these private conversations are what you would get in public. That's it. That's Orban says in private what he says in public. Now, I want to just then point out one the so, the just as an example of the abysmal, truly abysmal. I mean, because there's so many examples of it, but truly abysmal media coverage in Hungary. And I want to illustrate this by reference to the Washington Post. So the Washington Post has as its kind of Russia expert Catherine Belton, and now she's covering the Hungarian election as you would expect. She's obviously very anti-Russian, and she in fact wrote a book some years ago. She wrote a book about, I think it was called Putin's People. That was the name of the book, and let me just find this. And that got her into a little bit of problems because she was actually sued for that book, by Roman Abramovich. Now, Roman Abramovich, it's not everyone's cup of tea. Very, very rich, always described as an oligarch. Got very, very rich during the breakup of the Soviet Union. Always said to be a kind of Putin man and whatever. And he, well, obviously, he was played a big part in Catherine Belton's book. It was like Putin's People. But anyway, he sued Catherine Belton, and he won. And so here's the story in The Guardian as to what actually happened when Abramovich sued Catherine Belton and her publisher. And because they had claimed that Putin had instructed Abramovich to take over Chelsea Football Club. He owned Chelsea for a number of years, and then he was forced to disgorge Chelsea, which he did. He did sell Chelsea Football Club by orders of the UK government. However, the UK government insisted that the proceeds of the sale be handed over to Ukraine, which he naturally said, "Well, I don't want to do that. I will distribute the proceeds of the sale, maybe between Russia and Ukraine, or maybe between both sides of the conflict in Ukraine. But I'm not just going to hand over the proceeds of the sale to Zelensky." So that's an ongoing issue. But anyway, here's the Guardian story. Roman Abramovich settles libel claim over Putin biography. Russian oligarch ends his case against journalist Catherine Belton over her book, Putin's People. And then the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich has settled his libel claim against journalist Catherine Belton over her best-selling book, Putin's People, after an agreement was reached. The text will now recognize that the allegation Abramovich bought Chelsea Football Club at the Russian president's behest is not a statement of fact. It will include additional denials from the oligarch spokesperson and the club. And then Abramovich sued over a number of claims, including that he bought Chelsea on Vladimir Putin's orders. He was one of three Russian tycoons who initiated libel proceedings against Belton and HarperCollins, together with the Russian state oil company Rosneft. The other defendants subsequently settled or withdrew their claims, and then Abramovich ended his case after HarperCollins said on Wednesday some information concerning the oligarch was inaccurate. It agreed to make revisions to the book, widely acclaimed as the definitive work of the. I mean, this is what I mean by the absolute crap that you get in the journal. Widely acclaimed as the definitive work. It's not acclaimed by anyone. It's a piece of hackery, worst kind of journalism. And the definitive work. What definitive work? On the Putin era. And then the publisher said, while the book always included a denial that Mr. Abramovich was acting under anybody's direction when he purchased Chelsea, the new edition will include a more detailed explanation of Mr. Abramovich's motivations for buying the club. HarperCollins has also made clear in the book that there is no evidence beyond the statements of the individuals themselves supporting claims made to the author by former Kremlin insider Sergei Pugachev and two other unnamed individuals. And then HarperCollins acknowledged that a High Court judge described Berezovsky as an inherently unreliable witness. It added HarperCollins and the author apologized that these aspects of the book were not as clear as they would have liked them to have been, and are happy to have now clarified the text. Anyway, so that was what that's a measure of Catherine Belton, and but she was also a kind of a figure who played a role in during Russiagate. So if you recall, our friend Hans Manke, who has appeared a number of times on the Gaggle, he kind of pointed out, Catherine Belton did quite a lot of smearing during the heyday of Russiagate. And here's our friend Hans Manke, who pointed to this. This was from 2016. It says, Catherine Belton, a close friend of Christopher Steele. Remember Christopher Steele of Steele dossier fame? A close friend of Christopher Steele published a smear in the Financial Times, falsely targeting two innocent Americans with Russia collusion lies. It was a last-ditch attempt to swing the 2016 election to Clinton. How is she allowed to spread these lies? Well, of course you're allowed to spread these lies if you're spreading lies in the approved direction. And here was the story. This was this Sergei Milian. You remember him? He was a key figure in Russiagate. He was named by Christopher Steele as a source, that he was somehow a key source for him. He was nothing of the source, but nonetheless, it was a smear against this guy. He was just simply head of, I think, the Russian American Chamber of Commerce, something like that. So that's Catherine Belton. Now, she's as I say, she's now reappeared as someone who's covering the Hungarian election. And she, she remember she recently published this article in the Washington Post. We covered it briefly, but it's an absolutely just ridiculous, almost insane article. The true kind of um, uh, the paranoia, recalling the heyday of RussiaGate. And here's this article, and here's the. And you recall this was to tilt Hungarian election. Russians propose staging assassination attempt. So here we are. So we're to tilt Hungarian election to secure a victory for Orban. Russians propose staging assassination attempt. To aid Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a friend of Russia, yeah. In his election, operatives proposed the game changer, a staged assassination attempt to stir supporters. It's a staged assassination. Where is the staged assassination attempt? And then here she is, Catherine Belton. In the run up to Hungary's pivotal election in April, a unit of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service last month began sounding the alarm over plummeting public support for Prime Minister Viktor Orban, whose friendly ties to Moscow have long given the Kremlin a strategic foothold inside the NATO and the European Union. So notice this. In the run up to Hungary's pivotal election, a unit of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service last month began sounding the alarm over plummeting public support. How does she know about this Russian Foreign Intelligence Service? Well, how does she know? Well, this was given leaked to her, or not really leaked. It was just briefed. She was briefed about this by MI6. I mean, that's probably her main source rather than CIA, but it could be CIA. So they tell her, oh, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service sounding the alarm, and then she duly writes all this down, reports the Washington Post. And people are supposed to take this seriously, whereas this is just simply disinformation coming from MI6 or CIA. And then, and love this, whose friendly ties to Moscow have long given the Kremlin a strategic foothold. So the Kremlin has a strategic foothold inside NATO and the European Union. Officers from the intelligence service or SVR suggested that drastic action might be necessary, a strategy they called the game changer. Wow. This is the game changer. They just make this stuff up. The game changer. Yeah, that's what the Russians called it, the game changer. I'm not sure what the Russian word is. The game changer. I mean, it's because it's. I mean, something that American. It's like an American thing. Oh yeah, it's a game changer. But now apparently the Russians say that. In an internal report for the SVR, obtained and authenticated by a European intelligence service. Oh, it was obtained. Really, it was obtained and authenticated. They not only obtained it, but they authenticated it. And the Washington Post review it. So they presented here's the document, and the Washington Post reviews it. And that tells us that the SVR is very concerned about Viktor Orban. And they now have come to believe that drastic action is necessary. So the operatives proposed a way to fundamentally alter the entire paradigm of the election campaign. It's so nice that the Russians use these fashionable American expressions like paradigm. The election campaign, the staging of an assassination attempt on Viktor Orban. Okay, so staging it. Well, that's always very interesting, because if you say you're going to stage an assassination attempt, and lo and behold, there is an assassination attempt. You can either, if it's unsuccessful, you can say, well, obviously it's the Russians who staged it. If it turns out to be successful, then you can say, well, probably the Russians were behind this. And if it doesn't happen, well, it didn't happen because we alerted the Western public to this terrible, horrific, shocking Russian plot. So you win whichever way. Either it doesn't happen, in which case we thwarted this evil Russian plan. If it happens and the plan is foiled, then you say, "Oh, this was obviously either a false flag attack, or the Russians clearly staged this assassination attempt." If it is successful, then you can say, "Well, it was clearly the Russians who assassinated Viktor Orban." That's very nice. That's a quite a coup, a kind of journalistic MI6 coup, in which you win either way, and you always say that somehow the Russians are responsible. It's very nice to have journalists, who do the bidding of the intelligence services in this way, and uh, because and I said this is the way it always works, because the moment the story broke the other day, and we covered it here extensively, the story of the apparent attempted explosions on the Turk Stream pipeline close to the Hungarian border in Serbia. Immediately said, "Oh, it's a false flag attack, false flag, false flag." No evidence at all. That was a false flag. Oh yeah, false flag. And then it gets repeated by all the media, including by Catherine Belton. Oh, false flag, and that's it. Then everyone is off the hook, and it's either the Russians were to blame or Viktor Orban himself was to blame. Sorry. Anyway, let's go back to this brilliant piece of journalism by Catherine Belton. Anyway, it says such an incident. So so now she's quoting from this report. Such an incident will shift the perception of the campaign out of the rational realm of socioeconomic questions into an emotional one, where the key themes will become state security and the stability and defense of the political system. Now, if you're going to stage an assassination attempt, it's probably not a great idea to write everything down, um, uh, because for obvious reason, because it might end up in the Washington Post. So generally, I mean, it's if if you engage in this kind of clandestine, nefarious activity, probably you don't want to write anything down. But anyway, but it's convenient that they wrote it all down, and it's very convenient that it found its way into the hands of MI6. Such an incident will shift the perception of the campaign out of the rational realm of socioeconomic questions into an emotional one, where the key themes will become state security and the stability and defense of the political system. And this they wrote in a report prepared for the SVR's main unit for political influence operation, Directorate MS, or Active Measures Department. And then there have been no physical attacks on Orban, whose popularity is eroded because of a worsening economy. But the mere suggestion of staging an attempt on Orban's life underscores how high the stakes are for Moscow. How high the stakes are. The only there's a little bit of coverage in the Russian media, but nothing like the coverage, the obsessive coverage in the Western media. So how high the stakes are for Moscow? No, the stakes apparently are much higher in the West. It's the West that is writing nonstop about an election in a small Central European country. The July 2024 campaign trail attack, in which Donald Trump was grazed by a would-be assassin's bullet, resulted in iconic photos of him, praised for his resilience, and a quick bump in his poll numbers, especially among core supporters, and then so on, and then so that was the her contribution in, in the Washington Post in March. And this came out after she made it. She visited Hungary, met some of the people here in the various Soros, National Endowment for Democracy think tanks like Political Capital, and then she wrote this article in the Washington Post. But the other day, she actually came up with something even more intriguing. This fine journalist, and what she came up with. Let me just find this. Yes, what she came up with was a new line of attack on Viktor Orban. So we've had Orban. We started off with Orban is with Trump. He's a Trumpian. Now he's getting punished in Hungary for being a Trumpian. We've had, of course, Orban, the Putin puppet. All the conversations between Orban and Putin, Siarto and Lavrov, and so on. So we had all the Orban in Russia, but now we have a new one, and also written under the Catherine Belton byline, which is Orban is in with Iran. Well, that's really quite surprising, because hitherto we had always assumed that Hungary is actually really very close to Israel. I mean, we know. I mean, it's been a proud boast of the Hungarian government that, well, Hungary is the safest place in Europe for Jews, because Jewish culture and Jewish life has been flourishing in Hungary, and we don't have any migrants, so we don't have all the sort of the anti-Semitism that we get elsewhere, because we just don't have many Muslims here. We've kept them out. But Orban has generally been very friendly towards Israel. And if you recall, Netanyahu a few months ago visited Hungary, and Orban had made clear to Netanyahu, no, you don't have to worry about any ICC arrest warrants here. Besides, we're leaving the ICC. We don't want to be a part of the International Criminal Court. And so, he feted Netanyahu. And interestingly enough, Orban and Netanyahu bonded over their mutual antipathy towards George Soros. So, obviously, Orban hates George Soros. I mean, because he's been very active against him in Hungary and all the immigration issue. Netanyahu's objection to Soros is a little different, because he just thinks that these Soros-funded NGOs are anti-Israel. That's Netanyahu's take. So they bonded over hatred for Soros. Whenever Orban has been attacked, for being anti-Semitic, out would come Netanyahu who say, "Hey, the last thing I would want to ever call him is anti-Semitic. He's a great friend of the Jews, and of course Israel." But anyway, so here was Catherine Belton writing about this this alliance between Hungary and Iran. Very conveniently timed, with obviously the war in Iran, but also with J.D. Vance visiting Hungary, and so bestowing the endorsement of the Trump administration on Orban, while Washington Post publishes this expose of the links between Hungary and Iran. So let's take a look at Catherine Belton's article. And here it is. And here it is. After pager attack on Hezbollah, Hungary offered help to Iran. Revelations about a 2024 call offering aid raised questions about Hungary's ties to Iran, as the Trump administration is supporting Prime Minister Viktor Orban for re-election, by Catherine Belton. So here we have, soon after the deadly Israeli attack that caused thousands of Hezbollah pages to explode in September 2024, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's government offered its assistance to Iran, the key sponsor of Hezbollah, considered a terrorist organization by the United States. And then we have Siarto told his Iranian counterpart, this is of course Arakchi, says, our Secret Service has already contacted your services and we will share all the information we have gathered during the investigation. Siarto told Arakchi by phone, according to a copy of the Hungarian government transcript. So we got the transcript being leaked to journalists, obtained and authenticated by a Western intelligence service. Oh, thank you so much, Western intelligence service. They obtained this transcript and authenticated it and presented it to the Washington Post. Every possible document will be shared with your services. Now, if you recall, what had happened was that the pages were sent to the leaders of Hezbollah, and they came from via a kind of a shell company that was that had offices in Hungary. It wasn't based in Hungary, but that had an office in Hungary. And I visited the site of an office. It was obvious that this was nothing. There was no office here. It was like obviously just a dummy corporation, a front company, XYZ Corp, and we have an office. We put a little notice here, oh, this is this XYZ Corp, and this is our corporate offices, but there's no office here. No, there's no one here. So given the pager attack, it would be understandable why a Hungarian foreign minister would talk to the Iranian foreign minister and would assure him, saying, well, Hungary had nothing to do with this. We knew nothing about this. We didn't even know anything about this corporation that set up an office in Budapest. So that's exactly the kind of thing you would expect a foreign minister to do. You want to go and say, yeah, we had nothing to do with this, and when we find something out about this company, the office, who whether they ever had an office here, whether they had any employees here, or whether there are any employees here, we will provide you with the appropriate information. It doesn't suggest any particular great friendship with Iran, other than its normal diplomatic procedure. Now, the notion of using this to suggest that there's some kind of bond between Hungary and Iran really is stretching credulity to an extraordinary extent. But I think anything will do in the last few days of this campaign to discredit Orban. But anyway, so there is some Siarto speaking to Arakchi. So it says every possible document will be shared with your services, and then Belton, some way down in this article says, well, Hungary was in the spotlight at the time because the Taiwanese company whose brand was on the devices had told reporters they were manufactured by a Hungarian company under a licensing agreement. Siarto was keen to stretch to stress to Arakci that his country had not been involved in any way in the September the 17th attack in Lebanon that killed 12 people and wounded as many as 2,800, and that the pages had not been made in Hungary. Um, and then, but the call, here's Belton writing, but the call and Suharto's apparent readiness to curry favor with the Iran's foreign minister. Curry favor. He's doing normal diplomatic courtesy. He says, we had nothing to do with it. We will investigate and we'll let you know what we find out. What else is a foreign minister, a proper, serious, responsible foreign minister, supposed to do? He said, yeah, I know this company that provided the pages seems to have had an office in Hungary, but we had nothing to do with it, and basically we want to just find out what the hell was this company doing here. So it says, but the call and Suharto's apparent readiness to curry favor with Iran's foreign minister pose uncomfortable questions about the Orban government's relationship with Iran at a time when the Trump administration is locked in a conflict with Tehran, while at the same time, the White House is providing support for Orban's re-election campaign in a high-stakes election. So you can see now what the thrust of this article is. They're trying to embarrass J.D. Vance and the Trump administration, while also suggesting that Hungary is in cahoots, in bed with Iran, doubtless as a way of influencing whatever the Jewish vote in Hungary, doubtless a way of the influences of the anti-Muslim vote. Hey, we thought Orban was anti-Muslim. Turns out he's in bed with the mullahs. You know, I guess that's the idea. So no, it's an uncomfortable questions about how Hungary not only is it in bed with the Russians, it's in bed with the Ayatollahs. So you can see this is getting really bordering on the psychotic. You know, this desperate attempt to prevent to ensure that Orban loses the election. So now, hey, I know he's said that he's a great friend of the Hungarian Jewish community, but look, he's really close to the Iranians. Anyway, this goes on, so there's people in the White House reading this. Oh no, I didn't know that Orban was in with close to the Iranians. Anyway, the call also jars with the Orban government's official policy of support for Israel, frequently breaking with its European counterparts to back Israel in UN Security Council votes. And how does Hungary get in with the UN Security Council? Hungary hasn't been. I'm not sure Hungary has ever been a member of the UN Security Council, but if it has, it's already many years ago. So I don't know how it could have any impact on UN Security Council votes, and announcing it was withdrawing from the ICC in April 2025 during a visit to Budapest by Netanyahu. But remember, at the time, Orban was attacked very virulently, again by the familiar media, talking heads and whatever. My God, he's leaving the ICC. He can't do that. There's no way he can do that. And in any case, even if he's leaving, he's still under some kind of an obligation. You remember that argument that was made that Hungary still has an obligation to execute the warrant on Netanyahu, because it's Hungary is a signature of the Rome Statute. It doesn't matter whether Hungary is planning on leaving or not; he still has an obligation to arrest Netanyahu. That, in fact, is absolutely untrue because, according to, I think, Article 98 of the Rome Statute, um, there is still, if countries recognize sovereign immunity, then they are not under any obligation to execute warrants against heads of state or heads of government, because if you basically regard government or state leaders as enjoying sovereign immunity, then you're not under an obligation to execute the warrant. It's there. I mean, they wrote that Article 98 for a reason, because countries would not have signed on to the Rome Statute if they felt that they were under an obligation to arrest heads of state and heads of government. They were never going to do it. So that's why they put in Article 98. Of course, nobody ever looks at Article 98, and then they just repeat, oh, doesn't matter whether Hungary intends to leave the ICC. It's still under an obligation to arrest Netanyahu. But that was the attack at the time. Now, with Catherine Belton and the Washington Post, apparently the Hungary's sin is being too close to the anti-Semitic ayatollahs. So you pays your money and you takes your choice. Depends on what day it is. Orban's either in with Putin or he's in with the ayatollahs, or maybe he's in with Kim Jong Un. Who knows? Anyway, let's so belatedly join our Gaggles locals board. And as I always say, if you want to ask me questions, if you want me to respond to any of your thoughts and comments, please join our locals community, because it's a very good community. We have extremely smart, extremely talented, brilliant people who are members of this community, and you'll get nothing but enjoyment and intellectual stimulation being among such a great community. So please join. And then we can interact. I don't have the time to go through all the comments on the YouTube. But if you want to talk to me, then join the Gaggle.locals.com. The Gaggle.locals.com. Anyway, so here is locals community. It's getting, I'm freezing up a little bit. And so we have first question is from Danuki. Danuki is one of the really outstanding talents that we have at the Gaggle. Always posts really fascinating news items. You can agree with some of the articles or columns that he posts, or not agree with them, but they're always interesting, always very stimulating. You always learn something from them. So anyway, thank you, Danaki, for all your contributions. And Danaki says, so make or break, whom do we put the money on? Orban, Vod, Magyar Péter, Orban or Magyar Péter, and how do you envision the change of Hungarian internal external policy under Tisza? Well, I'm not really very good at predicting election results, but since you put me on the spot, I would probably at this stage. This is Thursday evening, so at this stage, I would probably wager that it will be a very close election, and Orban may pull it out. Now, maybe whether he will get a very narrow absolute majority, or he'll get an absolute majority in coalition with the minority parties like Mi Hazang. But that's at the moment how I envisage. I'm not buying the polls that have Tisza far ahead, because I don't believe that there's been such a drain of support from Fidesz to TISA. I don't think it's taken place. I mean, some people I think did vote for Fidesz and have now switched to TISA, but Fidesz generally has quite a strong cadre of supporters, and I think they're energized and they will show up if the government has a good get out the vote operation. I assume they have a good get out the vote operation. I mean, I hope they do. So if given how motivated the Fidesz people are, that I think that if they can get them to the polls, then I think Orban can pull it off. Now, the other thing I think is working against Magyar is that he's a nobody. He's an empty suit. He came out of nowhere. No one really knows much about him. The only thing anyone even knew about him up until recently that he was married to Hungary's justice minister, Judith Varga, who resigned, was forced to resign recently, but she was the great white hope, or the great female hope of Fidesz, but she's gone. But that's all people knew about Magyar, that he was married to Hungary's justice minister, and now he's become this major figure. I mean, they're also, because nobody really knows much about him. Um, the things that are emerging, and they may be true, they may not be true, we don't know as such, but because we don't know much about him, you can't immediately dismiss their veracity. So there are stories appearing. I mean, obviously, from Judith Varga herself, she's written her memoirs. Basically, that he used physical violence against her. He used somehow mental cruelty against her. You can believe it, you can not believe it, but she that's what she claims. And then she's also claimed that he put a dog into the microwave. Not very nice. I mean, again, may not be true, but you can't have a prime minister who puts dogs into microwaves. So that's kind of damaging to him. Now, will it be fatal? I don't know. But when you are an empty suit, when people don't know much about you, all of these stories do take their toll. You want to take the risk? Hungarians are fairly conservative people. They don't change their minds that drastically. And I don't know whether they really want to take such a risk about on someone that they don't know that much about. So I think that might just work against him. So it depends. I mean, there are obviously undecideds, or it seems like there are a number of undecideds. So it's a question of how they will break in the last 2 or 3 days. I tend to think they're going to break for Fidesz. I think that people say that is it worth taking the risk? So that's my prediction. It's going to be a close one, but I think Fidesz will pull it through. I guess we'll know when we do our next live stream next Tuesday. Anyway, thank you, Danaki. And then Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. So thank you so much, Cynthia, for your generosity. Cynthia, of course, our film expert, film scholar, um, with her encyclopedic knowledge of film history and all of the intricacies of of the complexities of film production, music to editing, to stage design, to location scouting, casting, everything. All the manifold issues that go into filmmaking. Cynthia knows a great deal about all of that, and she every week graces us with her amazing knowledge and her amazing insights. And so Currently, we have The Wind and the Lion on our locals page. Watch the film. It's a lot of fun. It's very entertaining, and of course, as you watch the film, enjoy and learn from, because I like to think I know something about cinema history, but I always learn so much from Cynthia. So things that I had no idea about, even films that I thought I knew something about, and turns out, well, I didn't really know that much. So I always learn from Cynthia. So I think all Gagglers will learn a great deal from her. And we now have a new poll for our next screening. Please vote. The theme is lies, big lies, and the lying liars who perpetrate them. And so, kind of eight films. I mean, I think quite interesting films. So please vote. After this live stream, please join, and obviously, first of all, join the locals community, the gaggle.locals.com. And having joined it, please vote for in the next poll. And having done that, then watch The Wind and the Lion and read Cynthia's comments. So anyway, that's quite a those are the next tasks. So Cynthia says the U.S. is selling $500 million of oil to Hungary at $135 a barrel, widely called price gouging, since the usual price was only about $100. So it's clear the real winner is the U.S., not Hungary. If Trump is truly a friend of Orban, as he says, why not force Zelensky to fix the pipeline, even at gunpoint if needed, so Hungary can get the cheap $45 oil it used to get from Russia? After all, Zelensky isn't paying for the repairs, and Trump isn't at all squeamish about gunning anyone down. I couldn't agree more. I think the Europeans pretended to feel very strongly about the Ukrainian refusal to repair the pipeline. So what had happened was that basically Hungary wasn't getting its oil, but the Hungarians offered to send a team of experts to inspect the pipeline to see whether and how it can be repaired as expeditiously as possible. Zelensky said no, and then the EU also went through the motion of sending a team of experts to inspect the pipeline. Zelensky knew perfectly well that that the EU didn't intend this to be taken seriously, and he didn't take it seriously and said, "No, you can't come and inspect." Now, the EU absolutely doesn't want oil to flow into Hungary. They want Orban to lose the election, so they want as many economic problems as possible for Orban. So that wasn't meant seriously. But your point about the United States, I think, is absolutely spot on. The United States has leverage over Zelensky, and you can absolutely, if Trump wanted it, Trump could push Zelensky to repair the pipeline and do it like yesterday. He could do that. Just as he could insist that Zelensky stop attacking Russian oil refineries and Russian oil storage depots at a time when when oil is at staggeringly high prices. So you can absolutely say, if you want to lower world oil prices, then yeah, stop attacking oil refineries, stop attacking storage depots, and repair the damn Druzhba pipeline. So there's all sorts of things that Trump could do. Trump hasn't done it, and you're right. For all his apparent good feelings, and I think he does have good feelings towards Orban, he hasn't hasn't done him any great favors. Maybe because he thinks he's going to make some money, or the oil companies are going to make some money by delivering this overpriced oil to Hungary. I'm sure Orban isn't very pleased about it, but he probably he can't afford to make enemies at this time, so he has to pretend that he, he's happy with everything that the Trump administration does for him. And they did do something for him. I mean, it's not every day that a sitting U.S. vice president visits Hungary, spends 2 days in Hungary. Not every day that a U.S. president phones in his good wishes while Orban is at a rally. So Trump has done something, but when it comes to money, Trump, like the United States generally, drives a hard bargain, and there's no. I mean, we had this I think last November when Orban visited the White House. He was hoping that the United States would provide him with a credit line, the way it did with Milei of Argentina. And Trump said, "Yeah, he asked me for a credit line. I said no." So there are limits. I think that's from Trump's point of view. I think it's very foolish. I think Hungary is much more important to the United States than Argentina is. It's an absolute crucial player in all sorts of ways. A crucial player in Europe, crucial player in the global kind of populist, a genuine populist nationalist movement, and a crucial player in a kind of a new geopolitical reorientation. So I think Hungary is much more important than Argentina, but Trump didn't see it that way, and I think that was very short sighted of him. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. Really appreciate that, your generosity. And here is Marty. Always good to see you, Marty. And Marty gives us a nice picture of the joking and buddy friendliness between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who has been in Washington this week and had a private conversation with Trump. It was a private conversation, so there was no joint presser, no joint meeting, before the cameras. It was private. So essentially, from what one can gather, Trump made his feelings clear about NATO and how little the United States was getting out of NATO, how disappointed he was about the lack of support that he received from NATO over Iran, and how NATO is just a paper tiger, and how much he's going to rethink his future relations with NATO. So Rutte sat and listened to this, no doubt, and then he came out and said, "Well, I really like President Trump. He's and the alliance, yes, is much stronger now than he was before. That's Rutte's job. He's the towel boy at the sports club, and his job is to say, yeah, everything is fantastic, everything is going great, and Trump is an absolutely great president. He's been the best president NATO has ever had." And here you can see this wonderfully entertaining. Well, I mean, Rutte, he has no other role other than he has to keep the Americans happy, because it's the Americans who keep NATO going. And that means it's the Americans who keep him in his fat, cushy job. If the Americans say, we're not going to give you any more money, then he's out of a job. So, yeah, that's what he does. He comes to Washington. He's very good at buttering up Trump. And he's obviously, as in this picture, he's very good at goofing around with Marco Rubio. So Marty, as always, you always find these absolutely delightful pictures. I haven't seen this until just now. Rutte and Rubio lapping it up. Thank you very much, Marty. Thank you as always for your generosity and all of your superb contributions to the site. Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Anne Marie, our distinguished musician, the musical expert, the musical practitioner of extraordinaire of the Gaggle, who's performed at the highest international levels for many years, and worked with the most distinguished composers and conductors of the 20th and 21st centuries, with an amazing set of anecdotes about all of the amazing talents that she's worked with, an amazing set of anecdotes about the challenges of difficult music and the challenges of playing in difficult circumstances. And I always assumed that, though, because I never played at that level, but I always assumed that it must be quite difficult and quite stressful to be playing in a big orchestra where you're physically uncomfortable. You can't move around, and you got, often in overheated symphony halls, and so, Anne Marie's descriptions of these experiences, I just find extraordinary and fascinating. So, really appreciate, Anne Marie, for all of your contributions, and I think all Gagglers appreciate all of your contributions, and learn so much from. Your experiences and your descriptions of all the outstanding talent that you have worked with. We're going to post very shortly another contribution for the Gaggle Music Club, and I'm looking forward to Anne Marie is finding the time to tell us about her own experiences with I think a piece of music that I think you will really like, Anne Marie. Anyway, thank you so much as always for your generosity. And then Cynthia says, since Trump is totally unable or unwilling to restrain Zelensky from carrying out rogue attacks on Russian assets, I think he's not unable, he's just unwilling. Yeah, you're right. Even when they run counter to U.S. interests, yeah, they run counter to U.S. And when oil prices are going through the roof, this isn't the time to start hitting oil refineries and oil storage depots. Run counter to U.S. interests, Zelensky clearly comes across as a carbon copy of Bibi. Yeah, yeah, both complete dependents of the United States. The only difference between Zelensky and Bibi is that Trump seems to like Bibi for some reason. I don't know why, but nobody else does. I mean, everybody just hates him. Every president just absolutely hated dealing with him. But Trump seems to like him. I mean, it seems to, and Bibi seems to have some kind of a hold on him, whereas Trump absolutely detests Zelensky. He despises Zelensky, and you can see in every meeting between Trump and Zelensky. I mean, Trump just has very little time for him. But Zelensky, on the other hand, is much beloved by uh, United States' NATO partners. So I think that's a big. So here, all the people who detest Bibi among the NATO, the NATO leaders, all the people who uh, detest Bibi love Zelensky, and vice versa. Anyway, so is there a Zionist camaraderie binding these two rogue, hot for war leaders? One warring against Russia, the other warring against Iran? And if so, is the press still being tight-lipped about all of this due to the proverbial elephant in the room that no one dare speak its name? It's a very interesting. I mean, it raises obviously very complex questions, because Zelensky has been very anti-Iran. I mean, and he's even offered to help um, unblock the Strait of Hormuz. He said, "Yeah, we're ready to, no, Germany isn't ready to do anything to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, and the British aren't, and the French aren't. We Ukrainians are ready." They said, we unblocked the Black Sea. There was, and now the Black Sea is open for business, and we're going to do the same thing in the Strait of Hormuz. So he offered that because he's, in Zelensky's view, Iran is an ally of Russia's, and therefore Zelensky, hates Iran, and he wants to fight Iran because any friend of Russia's is an enemy of his. So that's been the line that he has been pushing. Now, the Bibi's position is a little more difficult because obviously he hates Iran and wants to destroy Iran and wants to basically break up the state so that there's no longer any kind of an Iranian state in existence. However, and he knows that Russia has been providing diplomatic support to Iran. Russia has obviously been providing some military support. There's been some military hardware, some the air defense systems that the Russians have provided Iran. But most important is that Russia has provided intelligence, targeting intelligence to Iran. I mean, that there's been we don't know that for certain, but nonetheless, the media have reported that Russia is providing targeting data for Iran. So then you would think, okay, so now Bibi will join with Zelensky in saying, well, any friend of Iran is an enemy of mine. So yeah, we got to basically, hit Russia and Iran both. They're our enemies. So you think that Bibi and Zelensky would be on the same page against Russia. But that really isn't quite the case. And there you get into the complexities of Israeli politics because in Israel there is a very strong, a very numerous Russian-speaking community. And this Russian-speaking community is rather favorably inclined towards Russia. They have a certain nostalgia for Russia. They like Russia. And Bibi has to take that into consideration. He cannot turn against them. So he has maintained cordial relations, despite everything else, despite the war with Iran. He has maintained cordial relations with Russia, even though Russia obviously has condemned Israel, for its actions in Gaza. Russia has condemned Israel for its aggression against Iran. But Netanyahu maintains cordial relations with Putin. They regularly have phone conversations. And I think that is on account of this Russian-speaking. It's a huge, influential, powerful community in Israel. And unlike the Russian Jews who went to the United States, the Russian Jews who went to the United States absolutely hate Russia. The Russian Jews who were in Israel kind of feel a nostalgia for the old country. They don't hate Russia. And so Netanyahu has to take them into consideration, and therefore he has to maintain the his good relations with Russia. So I think that's where I think there's a slight difference between Bibi and Zelensky. But it's given Trump's obvious contempt for Zelensky, it is. I mean, you raise a very good point, Cynthia. Why doesn't he tell Zelensky, hey, if you want us to continue to support you, and given also Trump's contempt for NATO and the whole Ukraine project, then why doesn't he absolutely crack down now on Zelensky? He said, I'm sick of NATO, I'm sick of Ukraine. They haven't done anything for us, and all Zelensky does is beg, beg, and beg. Now with his policies, he's helping to spike oil prices. Which is the last thing we need. So absolutely, Trump could do this. Yeah, he doesn't do it. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Aubergine, thank you very much for your generosity. Really appreciate it. Happy Thursday, George and Gagglers. Happy Thursday to you too. And Robert, always good to see you, Robert. Always want to know what's going on in New Jersey, but with Robert always has a very one of our kind of in a real serious intellectual, serious kind of philosophic intellectual heavyweights on among our Gaggle community. Um, yet another reason for people to join our community, the gaggle.locals.com. Anyway, Robert says, it's utterly diabolical what you say about importing immigrants into the EU. Yeah, no, absolutely. Where the wars waged against Syria, Libya, Iraq, intended to source migrants, will migrants be kept in legal limbo, the better to wield leverage over them? It sounds like a scheme to bring back feudal Europe with a new powerless population of serfs to do the scholarly work. No, I think that's absolutely is the plan. And it was more or less stated by Soros. You know, Soros has a tendency, I mean, he's quite old now, but he did have a tendency to blurt things out. You're supposed to keep these things under wraps. But just like in the 90s, when he was talking about how the Slavs will be used as cannon fodder for NATO. In other words, these dumb East Europeans are going to be inducted into NATO. They're going to be used as cannon fodder. You're not supposed to say that, but even though that was obviously the plan. But he made it clear in 2015 that the EU should set as its project, importing 1 million migrants a year. 1 million migrants a year. That was he spelled this out. He wrote this in a New York Review of Books article, and Merkel had more or less signed on to this. Now, 1 million a year. So the moment you say 1 million, given this limitless supply of migrants, that 1 million is soon going to be 1.5, 2 million a year. You know, very quickly they would take over most European countries. Everyone knows this. I mean, you know, many European countries are already very small. You know, once you start, you know, even a few thousand migrants, you impose them on Hungary, or you impose them on the Czech Republic, or you impose them on Slovakia, you completely transform the countries. Now, for the EU leaders, it makes government very easy, because now you've got everybody hating everybody else, and therefore there's all the more reason to have more and more bureaucrats administering all of these conflicts. You know, at the same time playing off one community against another, while acting as the regulator, making sure that no one offends anyone else, but you continually sow divisions, and then when inevitably these divisions spill over into actual violence, then there's all the more need for more government, more regulators, more administrators, more law enforcement people, more community organizers, all of it, this huge bureaucracy that essentially it removes any notion of national identity and imposes a ubiquitous administrative state ruling over a kind of a hapless population that's mired in mutual conflicts against one another. That's the plan. That was always the Soros plan, and that was always the European plan. And it would be very quick. It really would be very quick. You start bringing in, after about 5 years, if you bring in 5 years 10 million migrants, Europe is completely transformed. 5 years, 10 years, Europe, it's a completely different continent. And Soros wanted that. That's exactly what Soros wants. That's what von der Leyen wants. Because her life and the life of her children, her 7 children, that's not going to change. They're rich people. You know, they're always going to have money. They're always going to live in comfort. No one's going to bother them. They're going to live on their, very comfortable estates, riding horses, enjoying weekends in the country, enjoying good jobs. If this is going to be inflicted on others. And Orban was the first really to, and in many ways the only one who drew attention to this and said this needs to be stopped immediately. he has suffered consequences for this. He's been fined. He's been punished for this. I mean, they withheld funds from him for this. So it's not like he was just sounding off, writing op-eds in the New York Times. No, he got punished for speaking out against this. What Robert, you used the right word, diabolical project. So that's one project which is diabolical. Second project which is diabolical is mobilizing for war against Russia. That's a project. That's what von der Leyen's about. And this is something that they're also planning for the next over the next 5 to 10 years, a militarized continent directed at Russia. Orban stands against both of them. That's why it was so important to get him out, and maybe they'll succeed. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate it. And then NKMRD says, Marty, I find it terrible when people in politics or economics act like in the photo. Yeah, they do. There's a lot of people doing that. Hey, we're such great guys. Look at us. We're having a good time. We're goofing around. We're just like you. We're great guys. The complexity of life and nature is simply not reflected in their personalities, which appear flat and redundant. Yeah, I think so. And then Cynthia says the taco bar is open once again for a limited time. Closing time is Friday night. Take profits while you can. That's right. Well, we'll see. Tomorrow's, of course, yeah, Friday. Yeah, I think it's going to be early because the talks are taking place in Pakistan. So the talks are going to start really in a few hours' time. The negotiations. So we'll see whether the ceasefire of sorts will still be in place by this time tomorrow. Anyway, thanks to Cynthia. And then Robert says, I recall Putin ordering Abramovich to return his pen, but not by Chelsea. No, that wasn't Abramovich. It was oh God, the name the God, his name now escapes me. The one with the pen was oh God, he was the one with I mean, I can see his face. The with he had the fine. I have to look this up now. I mean, the name of the guy with the pen. Um, it's just tip on my tongue. Gotta look this up. Putin pen, return pen, return pen, oligarch. Yeah, Oleg Deripaska. That was the guy. Oleg Deripaska. He was the yeah, Oleg Deripaska. Yeah, no, I'll write it down so that everybody can see it. Here on the locals board, Oleg Deripaska. I mean, you can get that on YouTube. It's a kind of a hilarious scene when he makes Deripaska sign a document and then he said, "No, give me back my pen." It's, it was a hilarious one. And then Stone River asks, I think, a very interesting question, and which is Trump an electoral liability for Orban now? Um, yes and no. I think he would be an electoral liability for almost any populist leader in Europe. So let's say somebody like Alice Weidel of the AFD, who had good relations with the Trump people, and she'd had good relations with Elon Musk. And if Trump were to put in a call to her and offer even to campaign for her, I think that would be a serious electoral liability in Germany. I think it would be a serious electoral liability in France. Hungary maybe is a little different because I'm not sure that Hungarians care that much about Iran. I don't think they, the immorality, obvious immorality, and obvious illegality of the war. I don't think it resonates that much with Hungarians. I just don't think it's just not something that they spend a lot of time thinking about. Um, there's still a certain popularity that Trump enjoys in Hungary. They don't really care that much about Iran, so I don't think it hurts him. Now the question is, does it help him? And that I'm not entirely convinced that it does, because I think ultimately those who like Trump are already going to vote for Orban. I think they're already locked in for Orban. I don't think he will win over anyone through Trump and Vance making an appearance. So I don't think is going to do much. The one thing that might work for him, I mean, and it's possible, is whatever else you can say about Orban, he's succeeded in making Hungary punch above its weight. Hungary is still a small country, population 10 million, and now suddenly Hungary is a very important country, and Orban is seen as a very important figure. And that may work for him. I mean, the very fact that these political heavyweights arrive in Budapest to support him. I mean, remember, even before Vance, you had all these leading populist nationalists come to Budapest. There was Le Pen came to support him. Salvini came. Geert Wilders came. Millet came. This was, after all, that's a reflection of how weighty a figure Orban has become. And it ultimately, Hungarians will still feel, whatever, even if they don't like Trump, they still feel a little flattered by the fact that an American vice president should spend 2 days here in Hungary while there's so many other things going on. I mean, after all, he went after Hungary is off to Pakistan to deal with the war in the Middle East. So the fact that he found time to campaign for Orban is a reflection of how significant Hungary has become. So I think that does that I think will help him somewhat. Will it be enough to pull off election win? I don't know, but I think basically I don't think it harms him. I really don't think it harms him. I think it may help him a little bit, but I don't think it harms him. Somewhere else other than Hungary, it might be harmful. But here, I think Hungarians probably just feel quite flattered. Suddenly you matter. Remember all the days when Hungary really didn't matter at all. With Orban, Hungary matters. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody who joined me. Thank you so much for all of your questions and comments, and above all, as I say, please join our uh, locals community. I think it's very well worth it. We've got really talented, smart people who are members of the community, and it's always very interesting premium content that we have on our locals board. So please join. We're going to do some live streams on. We're going to do a live stream with Peter, I hope, next Monday. We'll do some podcasts over the weekend. And then Sunday, well, I'm going to be voting. No mystery how I'm going to vote on Sunday. I think when we do our podcast, I think we won't yet know the result. But I'll see if we can maybe do some some form of a live stream of the Hungarian election results. Well, in a way that people can follow, because there's no point in having everything in Hungarian. But so I'll see if we can somehow do a live stream on Sunday evening of the Hungarian election result. Of course, they might be very depressing, in which case it's going to be a very early evening. But it may be, maybe it will be good news. Anyway, I'll see what we can do. So thank you very much for tonight. Thank you for everybody for joining me. Thank you for the contributions to the tip jar. I'm going to be talking to the dogs quite shortly. I think they're going to give me a break because of the Hungarian election. Say, okay, well, this week we'll go easy on you. Next week all bets are off. So, but anyway, thank you so much. See you very soon. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.